This is the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast, presented by HoosierIllustrated.com. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast, presented by HoosierIllustrated.com. I'm joined by Kyler Staley. I'm Drew Rosenberg. We have a big show today. Special guest Brandon Ramsey from Kentucky Sports Radio making his debut appearance and also 30th episode of the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast. Kyler, how are you doing?
Good. You mentioned 30 episodes. We're in. So we had to do something big. And for the people that follow college basketball or even follow Kentucky basketball, I know there's probably not a lot of you with this being an IU specific podcast, but Brandon Ramsey is a guy that I've been really wanting to have on our podcast for a long time. With the college basketball season starting up next week, I mean, he's just the perfect guy. The dude knows his stuff. He really does. And he knows everything about all of the college basketball teams. And he's a guy that follows the state of high school basketball, Indiana, very, very well. We mentioned a little bit, in our interview that we'll get to here shortly, but him and I both, kind of handle Prep Hoops Indiana, which really take pride in covering all the high school teams and all the players, throughout the state. So I thought it was a really good interview, really good episode.
Yeah.
I think we got a really, really special one today.
Yeah, Brandon, gave his thoughts that on the new look roster for IU, some sleepers in the Big Ten, who he thinks is going to win the Big Ten championship, disappointing team, a bunch of stuff. I mean, you mentioned he is a Kentucky guy by nature, but he's watching all 364 teams as much as he can. He gave some mid-major picks, which last year he could have been Indiana State, could have been one of his picks. After losing their coach, probably not this year. I know Kyler, you're probably a little disappointed.
Little bummed, little sad, still a little salty how it all went down. But that's honestly the new era of college basketball that I just got to get used to.
Yeah, exactly. And before we get into the interview with Brandon, we got to talk some Indiana football. We can't move around it. 8-0 for the first time since 1967, which we've said so many times. But I want to throw something out there before we jump into that Washington game. If Indiana can win this weekend against old Michigan State to improve to 9-0, it'd be the best start in program history ever.
Insane, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely insane. It doesn't even it's crazy, and it's like none of this just seems real to me. Mm-hmm. I know I'm probably over exaggerating just a little bit, but I mean, the fact that we're sitting here, Indiana's 8-0. I was projecting them to be 8-4 in the season, and I thought that was a stretch. A lot of people were like, "Oh, they're a 6-win team," blah blah blah. No, they are absolutely cooking. Last week, they had some adversity. That's the good thing about this Indiana team. They have seen some adversity, not necessarily trailing because they never trailed once this season. Still crazy to say, but you see Washington have a really good drive, and then D'Angelo Pond steps up. He takes it to the house, and Taven Jackson, the quarter score goes down. Tavis Jackson, he takes over, and he's serviceable that game, and all the other guys, the wide receivers, the running backs, they all step up. But it's just crazy to think that this team is about to go in. Michigan State is going to be interesting. It's probably the game that I'm most scared about, and when I'm looking at the schedule, just because it is a true road environment. And I don't know how much you've seen of this Michigan State team, Drew, but they are scrappy. They can play. So it's going to be a test. This will be I feel like every week we say this, but this will be the biggest test for this Indiana football team.
Yeah, and real quick before I jump a little more into the team, I just want to address something because I know someone's going to be like, "Oh, Drew, the 1945 Indiana Hoosiers went 9-0 with a tie." Yes, they did go 9-0-1, but they didn't win their first 9 games. They tied their second game of the season, so this would be the first time an Indiana football team won all 9 of their first 9 games. So just wanted to, get that out there before the comments are going, "Drew, you said this." It's actually no. I know what I said, and it was true. But, I mean, you mentioned Taven Jackson. You look at the second half, he only threw the ball 5 times, but it's just the adversity. I mean, Taven Jackson was thrown into a tough spot against a very good Washington Huskies passing defense, and he really didn't make many mistakes. He had the interception, and, scoreboard watchers are going to see that and be like, "Oh, he didn't really do great." You watch the interception, it was a super weird, deflected pass. It bounced right back to a defensive lineman, which – rarely you see a play like that, but he made the plays he was supposed to. I mean, he might have missed Elijah Surratt on a touchdown in the first half, but hit Omar Cooper for a big one. And he did what he needed to do, and they relied on the run game. He also had the game-sealing rushing touchdown, but speaking of the rushing game, I want to talk about Justice Ellison. Season high, career high actually, 29 carries for him, 123 yards. Wasn't his most efficient performance, but every time it felt like Indiana needed a big play, he got it. The one that goes to mind to me, midway through the fourth quarter, 3rd and 6, Indiana's kind of right around their own 40-yard line, and they run it to him. And, conservative play call kind of seemed like, all right, we're just going to punt it and trust the defense that's been playing well. Well, Justice Ellison goes ahead and picks up 11 yards for the first down. So he was huge in the win for Indiana.
Yeah. Indiana's got like a two-headed monster when it comes to that running back, and they, Kalen Black, Elijah Green, those guys are good and everything, but obviously they're not getting the PT that Ellison and Tyson Lawton are getting. But I think when you kind of peel that up just a little bit more and you really dig deep into it, I think Justice Ellison is running back one. Just from what he's done, he's a senior guy. I think he came from Wake Forest, if I remember correctly. So, he's been in a high major program. Tyson Lawton's been great and everything, but I mean, Justice Ellison, he's the energy back in a lot of ways. He's the guy you give the ball and he's going to go out and make a play. And then, Tyson Lawton's just that big physical running back who's going to blow over people. But you can't say enough about this running back core. And then you also pairing that up, you also got to talk about the offensive line.
Yes.
It's been phenomenal this year. And over the recent years, it was one of the weaker points for Indiana. I go back to especially the Connor Bazelak, Tom Allen pairing. I mean, that offensive line was terrible, just absolutely terrible that year. But and obviously didn't really help with the poor quarterback play. But the offensive line's been great. And if you're Taven Jackson who's going to be coming in, there's a lot of pressure on you, right? I mean, your team's undefeated. They're relying on you. Kurt Schwartz's been balling out all season. You got to really credit the offensive line for doing their job and making Taven, look good.
0. That's the number of sacks that was allowed against Washington.
Wow.
And I'm going to pat myself on the back here, Kyler. I don't know if you remember who my, most important MVP going into the season was for Indiana on offense. Do you remember who I said in the Indiana preview before first?
Did you?
No, I said Carter Smith, left tackle. So when Bob Bostad was hired, even last year, the O-line play, it wasn't great, but it was still a huge improvement from years past. Bostad has quickly, transformed this O-line. And I think a thing that's going a little under the radar, we talk about all the new guys that Indiana's brought in, the transfers. Carter Smith, returner. Mike Kadick, returner. Bray Lynch and Drew Evans, neither of them were expected to start at guards. Then you had the injury to Kidwell. Stevens ends up finding his way on the bench. And you have 4 guys who have been in Indiana's system starting on the offensive line. And then you have right tackle Trey Weedig, who not an Indiana guy, but was recruited by Bob Bostad over at Wisconsin and followed his former offensive line coach to Indiana. So it's 4 guys who have experienced, everyone in this O-line has been with Bob Bostad at least like more than 1 year. And that cohesiveness is very clear when watching this team play.
Yeah, I mean, and you talk about the cohesiveness of the offensive line. I think that just expands to the whole entire team. Honestly, this team's play so well together, and they have a lot of trust in one another. There's a lot of times where, like, you can see like a quarterback or wide receiver, the running backs, they can kind of be hesitant with one another, blah 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 and stuff. This team's extremely unselfish, and I think what that does is that just proves that Cignetti's got that culture, and he's got that mindset of like, hey, not one person's going to win this team. If everyone does their job, we're big Bill Belichick fans, Drew. We kind of grew up on the do your job type of thing with the New England Patriots, but like that's what Cignetti's mindset is: do your job, do it at a high level. Let's score touchdowns. He hates field goals. Yep. Let's score touchdowns. Let's put up as many points as possible, and let's go celebrate this win and get right back to work on Monday. So that's just what he does, and now he's got the team cooking. I mean, they're going into a tough road environment, I would say, a rivalry game, the old brass spittoon. Yeah. It's going to be challenging for Indiana, but there's no reason to think that this Indiana team, with adversity that they faced throughout the season at times, there's no reason to think that they're going to get right back up, punch in the mouth, and then just keep repeating and repeating.
Yeah, I love the Belichick comparison too with Cignetti. Cignetti's under kind of the Saban tree. Nick Saban was a defensive coordinator under Bill Belichick with the Browns in the 90s. So just kind of funny how those, the ties, the NFL coaching, or just coaching world in sports, it really, you see guys who you have ties to people you never would have thought. But I mean, you mentioned Old Brass Spittoon game this week. It is a tough game. And I think, the most important thing going in the game is the status of Curtis Rourke. He had this thumb surgery last month or a week from Monday. It was kind of reported that Michigan State was like the target return for him. So, Signetti's not going to say anything. They're going to keep it close to the chest. I wouldn't even be really surprised if we don't know who's starting until we see who runs out on the first drive of the game. But I do think just, based on everything I'm kind of hearing, seeing, Rourke was throwing a football ahead of the Washington games. So I do think he is on track to play. I haven't heard anything to make me think otherwise. I think I'd be more surprised at this point if Rourke doesn't play than if he does.
Yeah, I think that they probably won't announce it until as it gets super, super close to kickoff time, which is 3:30 on Peacock, by the way, for people that were not aware. But I think Curtis Rourke's going to play this game. I think he's feeling good. I mean, the dude, as soon as he got injured, he went right back out and threw a 60-yard. It wasn't an interception, but he still threw a 60-yard bomb. I mean, he's just tough, man. He's really tough. But I think you can also, based on what Taven did last game, and the game prior in that second half, I do think if Rourke does miss this game, you're still pretty comfortable because got Taven who's serviceable. He can go in there and he can make plays as well. But I think if you got Curtis Rourke, that obviously gives you another edge and it gives you a major advantage as well.
Yeah, and with Taven Jackson, he adds a little bit more in the rushing attack, just his ability. We saw some designed runs from him. So if you're Indiana, you're Curt Cignetti, why would you announce a starter or Rourke's return? Because if Rourke's healthy, he's going to play. But why not make Michigan State and Jonathan Smith make that defense prepare for both quarterbacks? There's no reason to, let them know ahead of time. Make them, keep them on their toes, make them have to do the extra work. But going into the Michigan State game, at least for me, I look at this Michigan State team. I've watched, a little more than I'm proud to say of this Michigan State team, just because I've grown up in a Michigan State household. My mom went there. A lot of my family has gone to Michigan State. But their biggest issue is turning the football over. 16 turnovers in 8 games, averaging 2 a game. They have, I think, 4 games with 3 or more turnovers. Aiden Childs, their quarterback, he's a huge threat in the running game, but 9 picks on the season. Winning the turnover battle is going to be crucial. I mean, we saw D'Angelo Pons 2 interceptions last week. The secondary, I think Indiana they forced 5 turnovers against Nebraska, if I'm not mistaken, as a team. So forcing turnovers and winning the turnover battle, it's going to go a long way on Saturday.
Yeah, I think, honestly, this game comes down to the defense for Indiana. If they have Curtis Rourke back, that offense, no matter what, who's ever behind center, it's going to be explosive. But when it comes to road games, the defense has got to step up because they're the ones that got to, deal with all that crowd noise. They got to deal with all of that. I'm not saying Michigan State's a hostile environment by any means, but it's still tough. It's a conference road game, and it's technically against your rival, even though you really don't think Michigan State, Indiana being rivals. They are. They've had some battles over the past few years, both at Memorial Stadium and then at Michigan State. So it comes down to the defense. It comes down to Aiden Fisher and his unit, D'Angelo Pons stepping up again, and then Carpenter and the front line guys. They got to step up. They're going to be the ones that win or lose this game. But I think Cignetti's already got that mentality, and I think that he's going to have this defense ready to go.
Yeah, Michigan State, they want to run the football. They will throw it, but they have a little two-headed monster similar to Indiana. Kayron Adams, Nate Carter, both guys have been really efficient running the ball, along with Aiden Childs at quarterback. So you mentioned Aiden Fisher and Jalen Walker. Those are kind of the guys that need to, I guess, continue how they've been. They've been really, really good this year, and their consistency has been a huge reason Indiana's been so great against the rushing attack. And adding on them, it's Mikhail Kamara, Chris Carpenter. Sorry. Those guys up front, CJ West, have done a great job plugging holes, and it's been a big reason Indiana's been so good in the rushing attack. But Kyler, as we do every week, got to make our prediction for Indiana football, against Michigan State. I'm pulling up the betting line right now, so we kind of have a little more informed prediction. But the line is Michigan State is a 7.5-point underdog to Indiana, and the over/under is set at 51.5.
A 7.5 is that's a tricky number for you bettors out there. It's kind of interesting, but I mean, Indiana, well, I think they've covered every single week. So again, as I say repeatedly every time we do this segment, I'm not going to go against Indiana at all. So I think they cover. I think they win this game. I don't think it's going to be a high scoring game. Last week was okay, 31-17 or whatever, but pretty middle of the pack type of scoring. I think this game will be similar. I think it's going to be pretty defensive heavy for the most part. I think the defense is going to step up. I think Indiana will put up points, but I think Indiana's defense is going to do a really good job. So I'll take the under on that one, but I'm going to say Indiana wins by 10 plus.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat. I look at Michigan State, they've played some good games, but they're just so inconsistent. And especially recently, I mean, they've lost 4 of their last 5. They've struggled. They've only scored more than 20 points in one of those games. It makes me want to lean, on the under, and I do think Indiana's defense is good enough. I think Indiana wins it 38-10. I think they cover easily. I don't think this game is very close, but I think Indiana's going to run the ball pretty effectively, and if they can just force turnovers like they've done the last few weeks, they should have no problem against this Michigan State team. But obviously, the status of Curtis Rourke will be huge going into this game.
Yeah, just find a way to win. That's all that matters when it comes to this game. It can be by 3 points, 1 point, 10 plus points. It doesn't matter for this Indiana team to continue with the momentum that they have and to set up a really special matchup versus Ohio State and Michigan as well. Win ugly if you have to. Just figure out ways to win. That's how you do it when it comes to Big Ten road games.
Yeah, and Hoosier Illustrated, we've said this so many times. We're going to have all the coverage you guys could need for Indiana football's game. The previews, 3 storylines heading into the game, key players to watch, live blog, post-game wrap-up show. All of it, HoosierIllustrated.com, Hoosier Illustrated on YouTube. Make sure you're checking it out. Now let's move over to that interview with Brandon Ramsey. Hope you guys enjoy.
All righty, ladies and gentlemen, we are into our interview portion of this. Joining us today is a guy that I work really closely with. You guys that follow me on Twitter probably know that I do a lot of prep hoop stuff and cover the state with high school and stuff, but I really can't do it without the partnership that I have with our guest today, Mr. Brandon Ramsey. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Kyler. Hopefully you're I'm not sure. Can people see this? Do people watch this or just listen?
Yes, it's mostly a watch. So
okay, well, so I tried to make everybody happy. I'm wearing a red shirt. It's a Cincinnati Reds shirt, but I do have a lot of Kentucky stuff behind me. So hopefully the Hoosiers don't get too mad. At least I'm wearing a little bit of red.
Yeah, maybe I should have warned the listeners here. Brandon is a avid Kentucky fan, but he does cover them, so he'll be the first to admit. But there's nobody better when it comes to covering college basketball, the knowledge of college basketball that I know personally than Brandon. The dude knows his stuff. I mean, from every single team, from the low Division I to the high major schools, Brandon knows everything. But Brandon, I guess we'll kind of get started here. I mean, for the listeners that really, don't really know who you are and stuff, just kind of give us like your background and, how you got into all of this. And, we'll just kind of go from there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it was a little bit of a roundabout journey for me. I was a college baseball player that had dreams of coaching college basketball. And that's not something that just, happens overnight. So pretty much right out of high school, I started scouting service here in the state of Indiana, covered recruiting just like Kyler and I kind of do now with Prep Hoops. I was doing that at 18 years old, which is now 14 years ago, which sounds crazy to say. But and then grew that site over the course of about 3 years. Got into coaching across several different levels. I was an assistant at Hanover College, my alma mater, for a year. I worked at formerly IUPUI for a little while, and then Defiance and Wabash College as an assistant coach for 5 years across those two places. Got into the college side of things once I got out of coaching, at least more so once I got out of coaching, and started writing with KentuckySportsRadio.com, which is now part of the On3 Sports Network. And then now I host my own college basketball show, the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show, and do a lot of kind of national work just on Twitter with On3, and then, specifically KSR, the Kentucky basketball team. But yeah, like Kyler said, I pride myself on watching, as close to all 364 teams as possible. And I genuinely am somebody that can enjoy like a Patriot League game about as much as I can an ACC game or whatever on a Saturday. So yeah, I'm excited to be here and talk some hoops with you guys.
Yeah, for sure. What's it like working with KSR I feel like there's a lot of people that know that, I mean, from a national standpoint, they are probably the top when it comes to covering one specific team. What's it like working with those guys?
Yeah, it really is crazy the platform that they provide, and I am super lucky to be a part of that, and just like the weight that throwing those three letters on the end of your Twitter handle carries is something that's not lost on me. Yeah, KSR is a juggernaut. It's been a juggernaut for a long time, certainly before I was there, and I'm just trying not to sink the ship. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of really talented people to work with. And yeah, it's really cool when especially within the SEC, but really anywhere where I can go out to some like this weekend. I'm going to be in State College going to the Penn State Ohio State game, and like I'll probably be wearing a KSR hat at some point, and somebody like, oh hey KSR, and like they'll know what it is. And that's that's not something you get with college sites all across the country. But of course, part of that, as you guys can certainly understand, there's an awful lot of people that hate KSR as well, but they still listen, they still read. So I really don't care if you love it or hate it, as long as you're paying attention. I guess that's what pays the bills, right?
Absolutely, you got to respect that. So, all right, so I guess the Indiana fans are probably a little annoyed listening to all this Kentucky talk. So we'll move into that. So, so anyway, Indiana, very lackluster season last year. Easily the worst season, from a standpoint of where they finished and how they performed, under Mike Woodson's, tenure as head coach. So going into the offseason, they obviously had to make a lot of big adjustments. And it looks like they got the right pieces, on paper. It looks like it's going to help them improve. I guess kind of what's your thoughts on, how Mike Woodson and his staff did this offseason, getting the guys in like Miles Rice, Omar Ballo, those types. And I guess kind of what do you expect out of them, heading into this season?
I think that Coach Woodson had as good of an offseason in the transfer portal as really could have been asked for. Obviously you mentioned a couple of the names off the top there, with Omar Ballo. I mean, that's one of the best big men in all of college basketball. But what I really like is, part of the quote unquote issue with IU the last couple of years has probably been that they've been so interior oriented. And that's certainly not the way that college basketball is moving. And that frustrates fans probably more than anything else. But then also, I think it maybe has held them back a little bit in the win-loss column. So you go out and get a guy like Omar Ballo, especially when you're bringing back Malik Renew, and maybe it's a little bit of like, okay, here we go again. But what I love about this portal class is that I think more so than in recent years, you're going to have some dynamic guards to sort of balance it out. Like having Cannon Carlisle and Miles Rice back there, that gives you a different playmaking dynamic than you've had, in my opinion, in the last couple of years under Coach Woodson. And then you add in another transfer like Luke Goody, who I think made 61 threes in the Big Ten last season. That provides some of that shooting element that Hoosier fans have been clamoring for a couple of years. Both Carlisle and Rice, I think, can score in a number of different ways as well. So it won't be so much just, pound the ball inside to Trace Jackson Davis a million times, or, throwing the ball inside to Khalil Ware a million times. Like you're going to be able to still play inside, but you're going to play inside out a little bit more this year. And I think that's why this team is looked at as a top 25 NCAA tournament type team, whereas that hasn't always been the case so far in the Coach Woodson era.
So Brandon, kind of based off that, like looking at, Indiana obviously had a huge transfer portal and then also brought back key guys like Mackenzie Mbako, Trey Galloway, and then you mentioned Malik Renew. Looking into the team next year, who do you kind of see as that X factor, that key guy that's going to be like the most important player going into the 2024-25 season?
He's overqualified in my opinion to be considered the X factor, but I think that the most important player on this team is Miles Rice. And the reason I say that, and I was talking with Joe Jackson, who you guys probably know, who does a lot of good Big Ten work on Twitter and YouTube. I had him on my show for our Big Ten preview, and we were talking about how, especially coming out of that IU exhibition against Tennessee, like there was a lot of times I thought in that game, Miles Rice was the best basketball player on the floor for good portions of that game. And we're talking about a Tennessee team that's, a borderline top 10 team in the country. They have an elite backcourt defender in Zakai Ziegler. And to me, what's so important about that, again, you don't think of like a best player being an X factor, but I think why it's important is because now if all of a sudden, if Miles Rice is your best player, then that kind of shifts everybody down a rung too, maybe somewhere where they're a little bit more comfortable. Like you don't have to have Mbako be, this, star of stars as a sophomore. Omar Ballo doesn't have to be the guy that averages 20 and 10 inside. Like Trey Galloway is no longer your like primary offensive playmaker. And that's not to take anything away from those other guys, but I think if you can come in and if Miles Rice has a chance to be like a first team all Big Ten guy, which that's kind of what I see him as coming into this year. I think he can be an all Big Ten performer. I think he can be the best player on a top 20 IU team this year. And as important as that is for him and his success, like I said, I think it really sets everybody else up on the team for success too. And therefore, rising tides lift all boats. And I see that being the case with Rice and IU this year.
And, there's been a lot of talk, especially going into last year. A lot of Indiana fans kind of got sick of Mike Woodson. I guess that's a nice way to put it. They weren't really liking how his play style was. It was ground and pound, throw it inside, let the front court players do all the work and everything, and it kind of, to an extent, kind of got him on the hot seat, I guess you could say. Do you think personally that that's fair to put him on the hot seat going into this season? Do you think there was some overreaction? Just kind of what are your thoughts when it comes to Mike Woodson?
Right. Yeah. I was actually just writing about this today in a piece for KSR that it's interesting kind of when you look back to when Tom Crean got fired. And that season was, the first time they missed the NCAA tournament. They just gone to the Sweet 16 the year prior. And then kind of the snowball effect since then, it's like, if you're an IU fan, do you kind of start to think, well, maybe Tom Crean wasn't all that bad. Then you have the Archie Miller 4 years that, certainly didn't go very well. But now, Mike Woodson went to the NCAA tournament his first 2 seasons, won a game in one of those years. Obviously, last year you missed out on March Madness. But to answer your question, it seems a little premature, but I think some of that is built by Coach Woodson himself, especially now this offseason, let's face it, there's 2 very high-profile recruiting misses that didn't do him any favors. He has a lot of expectations going into this year as a, essentially a perennial top 20 team, or a consensus top 20 team, I should say, across the board. So, unfortunately, sometimes those expectations can be, how you dig your own grave a little bit with, and I think too, and this is exactly what I'd said in my piece earlier, whether he should be on the hot seat or not, I think he squarely is, partially because of the recruiting side of things, but also, after the season last year, IU, I don't know if it was the AD or Dolson or whoever, but they put out a statement saying he was going to return as the coach. Well, that doesn't happen unless your coach is on the hot seat. That's not something that happens across the board in college basketball, where on a year-to-year basis they announce that your coach is returning. So it's pretty clear that conversations were already breached, in March and April of 2024. So if you fast forward to March and April of 2025, if things don't go well, yes, I think, we would probably be doing another coaching search down at Bloomington.
Yeah, I think especially last year when you looked at Woodson's, putting him on the hot seat, it was hard for, at least for me and Kyler. I think we kind of looked at it as he gave Archie Miller 4 years, and Archie really showed nothing through 4 years. And then Woodson through 3 years, won a tournament game, made the tournament 2 years versus Archie, who didn't make it a single year. Kind of, for us at least, it seemed like you can't really fire him. But now this year, it seems like, at least from my perspective, it's kind of the make or break year for Mike Woodson.
Absolutely. And I think part of why you're right, Drew, is that times have changed since Archie Miller was here. Like when Archie Miller was the coach, there was still a little bit more of an element where you needed 3 or 4 years to potentially build a program. Well, we see it all across. Look at my Kentucky Wildcats, look at Arkansas, look at Louisville. There's a lot of teams that literally don't have a single player from last year's roster and are projected to be pretty darn good. So I think that, right, wrong, or otherwise, coaches in 2024 and going forward are going to get less of a runway because you have the ability to turn this over. I'm not saying it's easy, but you have the ability to turn a roster over and get good from 1 year to the next. So I think that again, right, wrong, or otherwise, people are going to have a shorter leash. And exactly to your point, with them loading up in the transfer portal this year and getting some key pieces back as well, like Renew and Mabako and these guys returning, Trey Galloway, the expectations are set up where, yeah, if he goes to a Sweet 16 or an Elite 8 and everything goes well and they're top 20 all season, well, there's nothing to talk about here, even with some of the recruiting misses going in with the 25 class. But yeah, if you're 500 in the Big Ten, if you're, a first weekend exit, if you don't make the tournament, then we have some serious problems here, because we shouldn't have to take this long to get things working.
Yeah, and I think, switching a little bit to football, Indiana football is, I guess, the perfect example of that.
Right.
In 1 year, Curt Cignetti, flips a roster and puts a team that was, a doormat for years back on or into the national stage. But I guess moving a little bit to Indiana and Kentucky, the series is back on for the first time in years. First game 2025 at Rupp. I guess what your kind of thoughts on the return of the series?
I'm excited to see it happen. As at least Kyler knows, and I think some people that follow me know, I'm not the traditional Kentucky fan in that I don't have this deep-seated hatred towards IU. I'm a born and raised Hoosier. I've lived here for 30 of my 32 years. I grew up going to IU basketball games with my parents. With my parents are IU graduates. I want Kentucky to play IU. I honestly secretly kind of cheer for IU when they have nothing to do with Kentucky. So I'm very happy to see it come back. I was at the Christian Watford game back when that happened, and I always say that, unfortunately, one of probably the cooler environments I've ever been in as a sports fan is a bad memory for me. But I'm excited to see that come back. It's there's no reason why these two storied programs that are, share a border with each other shouldn't play. It's a game, kind of the storylines are laid out for you, and for us to have gone, 10 plus years or whatever without playing, was unfortunate. There were some reasons why, and that's probably for a different show, but yeah, I'm happy that it's back. It's a good thing for college basketball, and I think it's a good thing for both fan bases.
Yeah, I think Kyler, speaking for Kyler and myself, I think we'd both really agree with that. After you mentioned the Watford shot, a lot of Indiana fans, kind of like to say, John Calipari was scared of Assembly Hall. It's the whole thing. Now that Calipari, not a part of Kentucky anymore, is left for Arkansas. Mark Pope era started, I guess. What was as a Kentucky guy, what was your kind of thoughts on that whole, I guess, take that Calipari was scared of Assembly Hall?
Yeah, I don't think that scared was the right word, but he was mad. He was mad at Assembly Hall.
Yes.
As much as you can be mad at an inanimate object, but obviously it was more about the fans, and it was a different level of hostile. It was a bit much. There were problems. I was a Kentucky fan in the stands. I had things said to me that I've never had at a sporting event in my life, and I've gone to a lot of them. It was not a healthy atmosphere.
Yeah.
Now, at the end of the day, it's a big time college basketball game. This isn't we don't expect a G-rated crowd. So that, some of it is just part of it. Now, like I said, I've been to an awful lot of sporting events and hostile environments. None of them match that. So I do think things went overboard that day. Now, is that a reason to never go back? Probably not. Would Kentucky have continued to go back if Watford's shot happened to rim out? Probably. And that's where, that's where it kind of becomes problematic. Is okay, are you mad at the fans or are you mad because you lost? Some of that goes hand in hand, but yeah, like I said, I don't think he was so much being scared as it was Cal is one that he's not afraid to kind of go out middle fingers up to everybody.
Yeah.
And I think that was a little bit of what he was saying was all right, screw you guys. We're not playing here again.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, Calipari, Anthony Davis, you guys got the last laugh. Ended Kentucky, ended
Thanks
Indiana
for bringing that
season,
up.
went on to win national title. I gotta, I can't bring that part up without telling the full story.
Yeah.
It's only fair.
Yeah, it was poetic, I guess, to get a rematch that season.
For sure. So I guess kind of wrapping up our IU talk, and then we'll kind of go into a more national scale when it comes to college basketball. But your final expectations for this Indiana team, what do you see them doing in the Big Ten? What do you see them doing beyond the Big Ten? I guess kind of if the season started, tomorrow we're going to go into March. What do you see out of this Indiana team, and what do you think that they can accomplish this year?
Well, Kyler, the season almost starts tomorrow. We're almost to Monday, November 4th, so we're getting there, which is exciting. But no, I think that to put it broadly, and then I'll break it down a little bit more. Like I think that IU is a top 5 team in the Big Ten. Now I think the Big Ten is pretty wide open at the top, and I would include Purdue in that conversation. Like I think it's understandable to have Purdue number 1. They probably deserve to be number 1, but there's enough holes there, especially with a 7'4" hole that we all know. That there are plenty of teams. Illinois, UCLA, Michigan, even IU. Like all these teams, I think can compete up there with Purdue. So I think that it's absolutely that. It's absolutely a top 25 team in college basketball. Now, am I going to sit here and pick IU to win the Big Ten today? Probably not. I think there's just enough pieces where I still want to see it all play out on the floor and see what it looks like having some more dynamic guards and maybe a little bit more shooting and just making sure that all looks the way that I kind of think it should look. Of course, things looked pretty darn good against Tennessee. That was a nice starting point. I try to mentally not overreact to exhibition games, but it's hard not to when that's the only stuff you have out there. In terms of nationally, like I guess to me, and you guys could answer this question better than me, but like if I were an IU fan, I would not be happy unless we were, top 3 or 4 in the Big Ten and playing in the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. Like to me, that seems to be kind of a fair baseline for what you're looking at going into this year. So that's kind of to me where my expectations would lie, would be competing for a Big Ten championship and then getting to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, we kind of talked about what's in the seats heating up. There is definitely the pressure. But I guess kind of going to the flip side, going to, I guess, your side now, Kentucky, head coach Mark Pope flipped the roster, brought, impact transfers, Lamont Butler, Kirk Kriisa, Ortega Owe, like so many, pretty much a brand new roster. I guess expectations for you as, a Kentucky guy year 1 for Mark Pope.
Yeah, obviously, it is such an unknown. I mean, yeah, you said it. It's not just almost a completely new roster. It's it is a 12-man all new roster. Nobody's ever played a minute for Kentucky before, and only one player's played for Coach Pope before, and that's Jackson Robinson, who followed him from BYU. Similar to IU, we didn't play the competition that you did in Tennessee, but Kentucky looked great in both of the exhibition games. You get a little bit of a proof of concept of some new offense and some improved shooting and all of that. But I think that to the extent that Big Blue Nation can ever temper expectations, which is not something that either one of our fan bases does very well, I do think that because Coach Pope is sort of one of our own, and he was a captain on the 1996 national championship team. Again, to the extent that any Kentucky coach has ever gotten grace, I think he will get a little bit of grace this season to get things off the ground. Now, again, similar to in Bloomington and Lexington, grace kind of looks like, well, you still better make the Sweet 16 and you better compete for an SEC championship. You just maybe don't have to hang a banner this year. But I do think that this team, despite the amount of new faces and despite the insane essentially 100% turnover rate, I do think that it's fair to think about certainly winning games in March and competing maybe not with Alabama, but up there with everybody else within the Southeastern Conference.
Yeah.
And then I guess I'm gonna pull you on back over to Big Ten country for a little bit. I kind of got 3 rapid fire questions I want to ask you. When you look at the Big Ten, the standings and all that, you look at every team coming in. You got 4 new teams that make up the Big Ten, so pretty much 18 teams now. So,
Yeah.
who do you think wins it outright in the Big Ten? Who's your sleeper team in the Big Ten? And then who do you think is the team that'll disappoint this year?
Yeah, so in my preseason preview, I did pick Purdue one, or to win the league. Now, a little bit of that is almost just like a placeholder because I think the other teams still have more question marks. Like I really like this Illinois team, but I think they have more question marks than like they don't have a Braden Smith coming back where you kind of know what to expect, or even a Fletcher Lawyer, Trey Kaufman, Wren, those guys. I think UCLA has as many answers to question marks as anybody in the league with bringing back a backcourt of Dylan Andrews and Sebastian Mack. It's a pretty darn good starting point. 2 guys that were really good as freshmen, now going to be sophomores. They did a lot of good things in the portal as well, getting a guy like Kobe Johnson from USC, etc. So to answer your question, like today, it would be Purdue to win the league. I don't really think that like Illinois and UCLA qualify as sleepers, so I'd probably go with Michigan State. I think that betting on Tom Izzo is probably never going to completely put you out of your house. So there's some reasons to buy some stock there, but I'm also high on Xavier Booker taking a step forward this year, getting Jeremy Fears back. A guy that quite literally got shot last year and had to miss time. Like I think he gives them some more playmaking in the backcourt. I like their freshman Jace Richardson. I think he's going to be able to help them some right away. So I would probably go with them. Frankie Fiddler is a impact transfer for them as well. A guy that averaged over 20 points per game at Omaha last year. So I would probably go with them as my sleeper. And then a team that disappoints. I mean, like you're probably looking at one of those teams I already mentioned. Honestly, like I had said before, Purdue, Michigan, Illinois, IU, UCLA, like there's probably a top 5 there in some order. Like probably one of those teams is going to disappoint a little bit, but it's hard to really pick which one. So I guess my cop out answer would be one of those 5 will disappoint us. I just don't know on October 30th which one it's going to be.
Right, and that's the best part about college basketball. It's such a long season. I mean, it starts off you have your top 25. I mean, that's not going to look anything like it does right now. Completely different by the end of the season, But as I guess for the national stage, when you look at all the teams and you do a great job of doing your research on all these guys, who do you feel is the team on the national stage that is kind of getting looked over a little bit right now, and you think it could be really, really good this season?
When you're looking at the teams that can compete at the very top, I think that Wake Forest is a team that is getting some preseason buzz, but I think that it probably can be if you're taking a step back and you're looking at like, okay, who's sort of the surprise team that's going to make this year's Elite Eight or Final Four? I would look at a team like Wake Forest. Why? Because you have a little bit of continuity there, but then also you have an All-American guard in Hunter Salas that's coming back. And generally people like that, everybody always looks for, the impact freshman, the impact transfer that kind of is then going to take your team to the next level. Well, I think in recent years, a lot of times it's been the guy that was maybe going to be a first-round draft pick that decided to come back, and that's the guy that ends up being on the team that takes a leap. And I think that with him going back to Wake Forest this year, they could be a team like that. I mean, I would also look at this is a team that's picked a little bit higher. I mean, heck, they're a preseason top 10 team, but because the Big 12 is so deep, they're still like 3rd or 4th in the Big 12, and that's Baylor. I really like this Baylor team, adding VJ Edgecombe, who's going to be, I think, like the 4th straight one and done freshman lottery pick guard for Coach Scott Drew. Langston Love is back. There's a lot of pieces coming back for the Bears. They're once again going to be excellent on the offensive end. They kind of flipped from a few years ago where they used to be excellent defensively and kind of needed some help offensively. Now they've started to get really good offensively, and they're back to being like a 50 or so team, at least in the KenPom efficiency on defense. But I think they can put both ends together this year. And if you're looking for, if we're talking about like, looking at a betting future for a longer shot, I would look at Wake Forest for a team that's probably, to me, undervalued a little bit, but still probably a more realistic pick. I really like this Baylor team.
Okay. Maybe so. I guess kind of similar question for me. Not really saying Final Four expectations, but mid-major to watch. I guess that's kind of maybe going under the radar or just a mid-major that could shock some teams. I feel like last year, Indiana State. I know they ended up missing out in the tournament, but they kind of took the world by storm. I know Kyler was very happy when that happened. But is there a mid-major team you look at right now and say, this team could make some noise this year?
I think the easy answer to that question is Princeton. That's a team that has had postseason success recently. They bring back two very good players, one of which, I was just talking about Hunter Salas and kind of, spurning the NBA draft. Another guy that legitimately had some NBA draft buzz was Xavier Lee at Princeton that decided to come back. Now, he would have been probably more of a second-round pick type guy, but he came back. And again, it's not every day you talk about NBA prospects at Princeton, but Xavier Lee actually wasn't even Ivy League Player of the Year. That went to Caden Pierce, sort of an undersized post guy for the Tigers. And when you have two players that are that good, I think that, obviously you have a group that can go deep in the tournament. And again, you're talking about a team that has done it in the past some as well. Another one I would look at would be Grand Canyon. They have, one of the best mid-major players in the country there, and another team that has built success year after year. So I would look at those two teams going into this season if I was kind of trying to pick out, like, okay, give me the mid-major that, like you said, is going to be the darling come March and might win multiple games. If you want to start watching Grand Canyon now, if you want to start watching Princeton now, I think that those are teams. And then just to give a quick another one, on opening night this year, Vermont plays UAB. That's a game that'll be on Monday night that both of those teams are, probably a tough path for Vermont to get an at-large bid, but that's a team that's always in March. And then UAB, a team that's going to compete with Memphis at the top of the American Athletic Conference. So you're going to get two really good mid-major teams battling it out right off the bat this season as well. So that would be a great game to focus on as well if you're looking for some mid-major teams.
Well, I think we're going to wrap up here a little bit. So I guess, Brandon, where can all these viewers, where can they find all your work at?
Yeah, you can. Best place would be to follow me on Twitter at Ramsey KSR. That's where you're going to find, links to anything that I do. Plus, just my rambling college basketball thoughts throughout each day of the season. But also you can follow the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show on Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. That'll generally be out twice a week, Monday and Friday during the season. I'm doing a little bit more just to get all my preview content out right now. And then all the written work is on KentuckySportsRadio.com, which is a part of the On3 Sports Network. But again, you can follow all that good stuff. You won't miss anything if you follow me on Twitter at BRamseyKSR.
And I'll also add in there, go out and follow our work on Prep Hoops Indiana as well.
Why not do that?
Yeah, we Brandon and I, especially Brandon, and I don't think there's anybody better when it comes to covering this whole state of high school basketball. I mean, it's a juggernaut in itself. And there's a guy that knows pretty much everything about every single school in the state. It's Brandon. So definitely go check out his work on there and check out my work as well. So, but yeah, go follow, subscribe to all of Brandon's stuff. It was really a joy to have you here, Brandon. Hopefully we can kind of get you maybe at some point in the season, halfway through, and we can kind of, touch base and see what's going on during the college basketball season.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Always happy to talk some college hoops. And yeah, if you have me on again during the season, I'll make sure to wear my red again.
You hear that, Hoosier Nation? He'll help you guys out a little bit. But yeah, thanks again, Brandon, and it was a joy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys.